This is a business, so can you give some indication of what it would cost for the downtime or loss of a cruise? Because very clearly the technology is one of the most important things to maintain that business. The second question I've got for you really is that do you believe that the industry is moving towards business continuity as opposed to the safe return to port requirements?
If we lose a day in service, it's about $1 million a day loss off the bottom line, off the profit and loss. So it's a big issue for us if we lose a day's. If you work out, you can work it out. It goes from, you know, if you miss a port for a technical reason, you might give everybody $200 back in onboard spending. You know, if you've got 4,000 passengers, that's a lot of money. You know, all right, you get some of it back. But if you miss the cruise altogether, you have to give them all the money back. You have to fly them home and all the rest of it. So we work on roughly about $1 million a day. And you're right, there was a misconception about safe return to port because it's exactly what it says. It's about safe return to port. It's not about safe return to port and carrying on. And I think amongst the cruise industry, there was a bit of a misconception about the difference between that and business continuity, i.e. building enough resilience into the ship design that for reasonably foreseeable circumstances you can carry on with the business, i.e. you can continue on with the cruise.
I think we're all aware that the Canberra had stability problems and went round for all of her life with hundreds of tons of concrete in her. Have you had any deadweight concerns with any ships you've been building?
Well, it was a trim problem, wasn't it? It was a trim problem. It wasn't a deadweight problem. Yes, it was to get the bow down a bit. I think they put a concrete staircase in the bow. Yeah. Do you want to say more about that?
You know, she did live with a trim problem, not a stability problem. Yeah. But I think the main concern was the cracks in the main drive shafts. Which Tom Bunyan used to go and inspect every time she came into port by crawling up the middle.
Yeah, I mean the issue of deadweight, it's usually the problem is you run out of draft because you have to. It's a trade-off between stability and you're trying to stay in the limits for stability, and usually that means putting more weight in the bottom of the ship and then you just run out of draft margin. So the initial light weight of the ship is very important, and this is where we have to work closely with the shipyard, and we have not to let the designers get out of hand, you know, putting marble and stone everywhere, because we have to try and help the shipyard to meet the lightweight target for the ship. So then when we put our deadweight in, we're at the right draft margin and we've got the right stability. So the key is getting the lightweight of the ship right in the first place. Thank you. I hope if there's any naval architects present, I did explain that reasonably well.
Good afternoon. I have two questions. As you know, all cruise liners nowadays are built of high standards, a lot of automation, a lot of safety guards. In spite of all this, if we see in the recent past two very common phenomena, one is engine room fire, another is loss of stability. Now, how come Concordia can walk into rocks with all those automation on the bridge? Thank you.
So how has Carnival addressed those incidents? The first thing that we've done is that we now have our own training centre in Almere in Holland, and our target now is that for engine room resource management and bridge resource management, every officer will go through that training centre once a year now. So they will have the basic training, and then they will have refresher training every year, and before they get promoted they have to go for an assessment at Almere, and that's our own in-house training centre, which we're just expanding now. We're spending, I think, $30 or $50 million on expanding that training, because a lot of these engine room fires and bridge incidents are related to human factors. So, you know, training is absolutely key to reducing them. However, if you go on the Carnival website, you will also see that the company's undertaken to invest, I think it's around $680 million in safety improvements on the ships in terms of firefighting systems and things like that. So there's a kind of two-pronged approach. One is a technical one, and the other one is a human factors approach with the training. I hope that answers your question.
What's the economics of scale on this? Because if you're building a crude carrier, you can carry twice as much water with the same size crew. But in this one, if you have twice the size of, if you have twice the size of the ship, if you have twice the size of the ship, you need twice as many crew. You can build two small ships for the same price as one big one.
There is an economy of scale, and that's why the trend has been for cruise ships to get bigger, of course, because some of the fixed costs are the same. You know, if you put a 200-metre ship in a dry dock, the dry dock charges you almost the same as if you put a 300-metre ship into the dry dock. You know, the captain's salary is the same whatever the size of ship. But you're right. If you keep the ratio of cabin stewards to cabins the same, there is no economy of scale. But you know, a lot of the fixed costs do make it more attractive to build the bigger ships. However, some of the market segments demand smaller ships. So seaborne cruises, for example, their unique selling point is this kind of personal service and the small ship yacht type feel.
Richard and Nigel Gill, thank you very much. Absolutely fascinating lecture, and you're spot on. I was comparing all the time how you would design a warship. Asked me a question, which I'm going to answer because it leads to another question. I strongly suspect you could build an aircraft carrier optimally in about 3 years. The reason you don't is in a shipyard industry which is very, very small, geared to warships, you have to build up the workforce to do it, and you have to run them down. There is a limit to the extent that that is politically acceptable, so you build at a slower rate. Added to that, once you're on contract, another government then wants to reduce its rate of expenditure on defence, so it slows it down, it extends the build time, and actually that is inefficient. Yep. My question is, you seem to be on the magic 2 years, 9 months.
Yes.
Is that actually the optimum rate at which to build a complex ship in a market which is sort of almost infinitely large, like it's got continuous production?
It is from the shipyard's point of view because, and it is for our point of view because the shipyard has to support the cash flow to build the ship. So obviously it's in his interest to get the payment for the ship as soon as possible. So if he extends it out, it costs him more money. So that's in our interest because he will just add the financing cost into the cost of the ship. So then it makes the ship more inefficient for us because it takes longer to get the return on capital because the capital expenditure is greater. So the answer to your question is, it's in both our interests, isn't it, really?
You don't do stage payments?
We do, but they're not very generous towards the shipyard. And we tend to pay for the majority of the ship at delivery.
Do you think the Southeast Asians and China might start building more cruise ships, and do you think that European dominance will continue for the foreseeable future?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, there is it Clive Palmer, this guy in Australia who wants to build a replica of the Titanic? He's talking to a Chinese shipyard. And we did have a dalliance with Samsung at one time, and I think Holland America Line got fairly close to discussing a contract. But I think the strengths of the Far East yards lie in other areas, in offshore, in FPSOs and rigs, and so they have a good market there. Why would they risk building a cruise ship? You can already see that it's in the press, so I'm not telling stories out of school. You can already see that MHI are having difficulties building the first cruise ship for AIDA out in Nagasaki, and so there are risks in building cruise ships. So I guess my view on it is that the Far Eastern yards would be reticent to get into that market. Yeah.
In our time together, 70s or thereabout, shafting and propulsion systems, got a microphone here. They were always a hot spot, and Malcolm threw Tom Bunyan's name, with and without Tom Bunyan. And as you well know, we recently lost a fellow of this institute, Tommy Wilkin, who spent his life in the back end of ships and with Volsey and various other people. But you sort of caught me a bit by surprise. You've got your 8 or 10 or whatever it is clients,
Yes.
and on the whole ship philosophy, you occasionally have requirements,
Yes.
demands, whatever. But then when you get onto shafting, you've got some with pods,
Yes.
some with conventional, the big ones are water, and then you said water lubricated is your preferred choice. But I detected a bit of reticence in that comment. Is, do you have some of your customers who still want oil lubricated in that area?
We have no customers now who want oil lubricated conventional shaft lines. They all want either pods or water lubricated. And you want my personal opinion, I would go for water lubricated because it's simple, it's easy, and it produces no pollution risk.
Another one, round about the time of the first Royal, because we were doing the specification and drawings, I think, and then went to you and you carried on. The air conditioning, amount of recirculation, fresh, etc., I recall was a bit of a hot potato. Where do you stand in your recent buildings,
Right.
or does it vary with the client?
No, that's a very good question. I think you're thinking about the Oriana, not the Royal Princess. The Royal Princess was designed by Nuddy Hansen in Denmark. Absolutely, the efficiency is the name of the game now. And the most efficient solution now is with individual fan coil units in the cabins. So all the ships we're building now have individual fan coil units in the cabins, because that is by far and away the most efficient way of designing the air conditioning. So I would say, obviously I can't speak for Royal Caribbean, but as far as we know, all our competitors are all doing the same. So the fan coil units are the way to go, because you only apply as much cooling as you need in that particular space. You're not overcooling other spaces by having a centralized air conditioning system. So I can answer that one fairly simply.
Richard, thank you very much. I just want to say, when I was 16, I had the choice of going to sea with BP or P&O Cruises. I won't say which one I chose, but I can't help feel I made the wrong choice. My question is around regulation that you touched on, specifically the Maritime Labour Convention, and I wonder what kind of challenge that poses to the cruise industry in terms of manning requirements and the designation of crew and the difference that makes with the number of different people that you have on board in different roles. Thank you.
It hasn't made that much difference. I mean, are you talking about things like the size of cabins and that kind of issue?
Yeah, well, and I wonder as well, because they have designated positions for, say, officers and for crew, and for where does a dancer fit in, or where does a beautician fit in, and do they get treated differently under MLC, or is there no change?
No, they're crew. They're treated as crew. I mean, they all sign on the ship as crew, whether you're a dancer or a restaurant steward, you are crew. There's only crew and passengers. Yes, yeah. And so all their accommodation and all the other requirements are all met as crew. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's
Yeah, they're not supernumeraries or anything like that. They are crew. Because, you know, even if you're a dancer, you have a crew role in the safety organisation, so you might be a stairway guide or a muster station guide or something like that. So, you know, they all have a role, certainly in the safety side, as well as their kind of normal job, if you know what I mean.
Oh, Richard, David Smith, I'm chairman of the Institute's Human Element Working Group. You touched on human factors. One of the items that's of great concern in our working group at the moment is the poor quality of maintenance and operation manuals. Now, I can't imagine a more complex situation than the one you have in a cruise liner with regard to all of the operation manuals you need. What sort of controls do you have to make sure that you're having good manuals delivered to you by the manufacturers?
Well, that's written into the contract that they have to supply the manuals. They do vary in quality. I suppose our big bone of contention is that they send you generic manuals. They're not specific to the equipment on the ship. And so when you read through them, it's very hard to relate what they say to what you see in front of you. And I think that's a challenge for the industry. I really do. The manufacturers have a very kind of narrow window of how they see their responsibility, because their responsibility initially is to the shipyard, not to us. So they're pressed on price and delivery to the shipyard. They only do what the shipyard asks. And you know, you often hear afterwards, after the ship delivered, well, yes, you're probably right, but you know, that was what we were asked to do. I don't know whether I'm agreeing with you or not, but yes, it is an issue. It certainly is. But there are no standards for manuals and things like that, as far as I'm aware.
The nearest thing to a standard is the IACS recommendation 71, which is a guideline.
Yeah.
That it's probably far from what is absolutely needed.
Yeah. So we rely a lot. What usually happens is that the engineers, I forgot to say that our main role in Southampton is this initial kind of design work plus plan approval, and in each shipyard we have an inspection team who are there to make sure that the quality standards that the shipyard are building the ship to are adhered to, and they actually build the ship in accordance with the drawings that we've approved in Southampton. It's not always the case, so be careful. But towards the end of the period, all the sea staff join the ship, and a lot of the familiarisation is like one-on-one. So the manufacturer's representative for the oil-fired boiler, for example, will be there, and the chief engineer will allocate some engineers to go and work with him, so they get to understand how the equipment works and what they have to do to troubleshoot it. So that's probably the way we get round the inadequacies of the manuals. But the other problem is, of course, then those people go on leave and new people come on board who are maybe not so familiar with the equipment, and I agree with you, it's an issue. It is an issue.
Very small one. I was just wondering, when you were talking about the individual climate control in the cabins,
Yeah.
how are you
Coping with the air changes.
So there is a central air conditioning unit that bleeds fresh air into the recirculating fan coil unit, and that amount of air is dimensioned for the, I can't remember, is it 25 litres per person per hour or something like that, and that the equivalent amount is taken out through the toilet exhaust.
Thank you.
Straight away. You've talked about the new builds, but the new ships all seem to be coming on with new gizmos, new fancy parts, getting bigger, more glitzy. So it implies that a ship maybe 5 years old is out of date. What's happening to the older ships, and do you get involved in sort of major midlife refits, or do you just sell them on?
No, we do major midlife refits, and in fact, Carnival Cruise Line, if you read in the press, there was a project called Project Sunshine, where they completely revamped one ship and in fact changed its name. So yes, no, we do midlife upgrades. Should we be involved? Probably, but we do have a separate department in Miami that's responsible for major projects like that. We could probably do more from a perspective of helping them with stability and weight control, which is a real challenge in these refits, knowing what's come off and what's going back on in terms of weight. That is really challenging.
91,000 odd in total in the company, that's quite a good ratio in terms of efficiency and performance, considering all the marketing and sales and bidding and so on. I was quite impressed by that. This huge upfront design activity prior to contract, when do you select the shipyard and how do you get value for money?
You have to select the shipyard fairly early on in the process on the basis of a kind of we usually sign an MOU with a shipyard because you need the shipyard engaged in the pre-contract design process. So we will say this is the kind of ship that we want to build. We will go around the shipyards. Sometimes the shipyards will self-select because they've either got other work from other clients, and then you have to then commit to that shipyard fairly early on the basis of this MOU, which can be challenging because you've already agreed a price for the ship, so everything you ask for after that is always an extra cost, of course. So that's the challenge, is to make sure that the ship, at least it's fairly well defined in the MOU, and we often do that by using a reference ship standard. So we say that the systems, the standard of outfitting, the standard of the cabin outfitting will be to this standard, and then the shipyards, if they know that ship and they've already got the drawings, that's fine. Otherwise, if it's a different shipyard, they will go and visit the ship and make copious notes. And then once we've signed the MOU, then we can move on with the design phases that I talked to through to a firm contract. Does that make sense?
It does.